Alright, we're going to be teaching you this week how to play BattleCON. As we mentioned earlier, BattleCON is an independently published game. It is going to be coming out shortly. It is thematically supposed to resemble a console fighting game. And in that way, it is similar to Yomi, which we reviewed in our first episode. But it is, in gameplay, very different. And mechanically, it feels completely different from Yomi. It has an entirely different system, and it just feels very distinct. And I think that's interesting, how you can have two thematically similar games that feel so very apart. At the very beginning of the game, each player selects a character, and there are 12 characters, and it has on the back of the board what all the characters are. It gives you a relative difficulty of play for each character, which I think is nice. And you pick one of these, you take that character's character deck, you then take a base deck, which I'll talk about, you put yourself on the board, you get your hit points, and play begins. The board, incidentally, looks something like this. You play in the middle. You play in the middle row here.
The other two rows are used for more players. When you have
There's additional
players.
Yeah, there are additional modes of play you can do. We're going to be going over the two-player game in this tutorial. So the game ends, and you win the game when you reduce your opponent's hit points to 0. So that's the goal is each character starts with 20 hit points, and the goal is to, through a series of attacks, reduce their hit points to none. And this is done through a series of beats. And the term for one round of play is a beat. At the very beginning of the very first beat, you take from your hand a base and a style card, which I'll talk about. You put them in discard. You put them in a discard pile. You then take another base and style and put them in discard pile number 2 here. You do this you do this face down, and your opponent does it face down. You reveal them at the same time, and then you go into the more combat phase of the game. You take a style card from your hand and a base card from your hand. You play them face down. And then this is going to be the attack that you are going to play this round. Next is the anteing phase. Certain characters will have certain tokens that go with their character that have different effects. And you play these face up during the ante phase. You declare what you're going to play. So in this instance, I would say I'm going to ante this token along with this attack. That gives some special effect to this attack. After the attack resolves, this token is discarded. Next, you reveal your attacks. You resolve the effects. You resolve the damage and everything, and anything else that might happen on the cards. And then you take discard pile number 2 back into your hand. You move discard pile number 1 to discard pile number 2, and you put the style and base you just played into discard pile number 1. In this way, there's kind of a cooldown mechanic built into the game. You're going to have your whole deck in your hand at all times, excluding the 2 combinations of cards you have in your discard pile. And more or less, that's how the game is played. Those are the base mechanics for the game. You go through a series of beats until somebody's at 0 hit points. To go a little bit more in depth then, there are, as I mentioned, 2 kinds of cards, styles and base. Your character is going to be what supplies you with all of your styles, and styles are unique cards that modify your base attacks. The base deck is in common for each character. Each character gets the same set of base attacks, and these and this from character to character is identical. You also get one base that is unique to your character, and this does character-specific things and other special effects. On the card, you're going to see a number of things. You're going to see, on a base card, you're going to see a value for range, you're going to see a value for power, and you're going to see a value for priority. On the base, you're going to see modifiers for all these things, and when you play the effect, you're going to add these all together. So, for instance, this combination has 1 range, 2 power, 5 priority, and being modified by +0 range, -1 power, +3 priority. So the total attack would have 1 range, 1 power, 8 priority. These effects work as such. Range gives you how far away your attack can hit. So, say I'm red here. A range 1 attack can hit here or here. A range 2 attack can only hit 2 away. That is to say, it can only hit here. Range 2 does not mean up to 2, it means precisely 2. Your power is going to The power is the amount of damage you deal if the attack hits. So if this attack were to land, the opponent would take 1 damage, and that is subtracted from their life points. Priority determines in which order you move. Whichever attack has the higher priority is the attack that is going to resolve first. And which means that after this attack is resolved, your opponent your opponent will get to go afterward. If there is a tie in priority, both you and your opponent are going to play another base face down on top of the base you've already played, revealed at the same time, and then check the new priority and resolve based on that. This essentially goes on until the tie is broken. Let's see. Aside from that, there are a couple of unique effects that merit. Well, I suppose I should have mentioned the effect on the card as well. Here, each card, each style, and most of the bases as well are going to have an effect on them. And when you play a style and base together, you resolve the effects on both the cards. You don't pick one; you resolve all of them, and you resolve them in a specific order too, because a lot of these have, well, not really conditionals, but a timing in which they're resolved. The first thing that are resolved are effects that are on reveal. These effects go off when you turn the cards over. The next thing that resolves is before activating, and this is when it is your turn to activate. If you have any before activating effects, those go off before you do the attack. Then there are on-hit effects, where if you hit your opponent, you resolve those. There's after activating, which after your attack resolves, you resolve. And there is end of beat, which go off at the end of the beat. Aside from that, there are a couple of unusual mechanics that should be mentioned because they're maybe if not crucial to gameplay, certainly very important. And the biggest of these effects is stun. And how stun works is if you activate first and deal damage to your opponent, that opponent is stunned. They lose their turn, they do not activate, they do not resolve before activation, on hit, on damage, or after activation effects. Stun can be bypassed by Stun Guard, which is an effect that is on certain cards that gives you essentially a value that your opponent needs to bypass in order to do not in order to do damage, but in order to stun you. So if you are doing 3 damage and your opponent has Stun Guard 4, they're going to ignore the stun. You have to do more damage than their Stun Guard value to stun them. There are also attack cards that say you stun your opponent if this attack hits, regardless of their Stun Guard value. And it doesn't matter how much Stun Guard they have, these effects will still stun them. There are also certain defense cards that say if your opponent would stun you automatically, you resist that stun. So there's there's almost like an escalating war between the two. There seems like there's always a way to counter the other.
And that's called Stun Guard, or
right.
Stun Immunity.
Stun Immunity is a term for that. Aside from that, there are a handful of other interesting effects. The only one that I think merits mentioning here would be Soak, which is not immediately apparent. Soak essentially is damage resistance, where you can absorb that many points of damage without losing life points on that turn. And the cards will say specifically you have Soak some number. And I believe that is it. Is there anything I'm missing?
Just 2 caveats on movement that struck me. When you're moving, when a card says move a certain number of spaces, you actually must move. It's mandatory. You cannot opt not to move. And if it says, for instance, move forward or backward a certain number, and you're in the backmost space, you cannot choose to move backward 0. You must actually choose the forward option if you have it. In addition, with movement, you will actually jump your opponent if you're in a position to. So if it says move forward 3 spaces, and your opponent is on the 3rd space, you will jump him and go to the 4th space, the space behind him. All right. So yeah, I think that's it for BattleCON. We'll tell you what we thought about the next section.